गाइस दोबारा आ चुके हैं हम। और ये सब बंद करते हैं, थोड़ा सा फालतू का आ गया कंटेंट में। दोबारा से
That means all of the rows in the employee table are going to get included in the results, but only the rows in the branch table that matched are going to get included because the branch table is like the right table. There's another type of join we can use, which is called a right join. And so I can just say right. Now this is going to do the opposite.
अब राइट जॉइन क्या करता है, राइट वाले को प्रिजर्व करेगा कि लेफ्ट वाले को लेफ्ट वाले का प्रिजर्व हो या ना, लेकिन राइट वाला तो प्रिजर्व होगा। ये एक इनर टाइप का जॉइन हो गया। ये कहते हैं राइट वाले में तो है ही नहीं, इनर टाइप का जॉइन नहीं हुआ क्योंकि बफेलो ब्रांच के लिए कोई एम्प्लॉय या मैनेजर मैनेजर नहीं था बफेलो ब्रांच के, लेकिन फिर भी इंक्लूडेड है। यहाँ देख सकते हैं।
So instead of including all of the rows from the employee table, no matter what, now it's going to include all of the rows from the branch table, no matter what. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. And down here, you'll see we have all of the rows from the branch table. So not only did we get the rows which had managers, but we also got the rows which didn't. So down here, remember the Buffalo branch, which we just added, didn't have a manager. So it didn't actually get linked to an employee. So therefore, both of these things were null. So in the left join, we got all of the employees. In the right join, we got all of the branches. In other words, in the left join, we got all of the rows from the left table. In the right join, we got all of the rows from the right table. And so in certain circumstances, you're going to want to do either one of those. So those are the three basic.
मिनट गाइस, एक तो इतना शोर मचा रहे हैं ये लोग। चेक करना पड़ेगा कि चल भी रहा है नहीं। लेकिन फिर भी इंक्लूडेड है।
Didn't have a manager, so it didn't actually get linked to an employee. So therefore, both of these things were null. So in the left join, we got all of the employees. In the right join, we got all of the branches. In other words, in the left join, we got all of the rows from the left table. In the right join, we got all. And down here, you'll see we have all of the rows from the branch table. So not only did we get the rows which
ये चेक करने से मुझे चल भी रहा है। हाँ, चल रहा है।
had managers, but we also got the rows which didn't. So down here, remember the Buffalo branch, which we just added, didn't have a manager. So it didn't actually get linked to an employee. So therefore, both of these things were null. So in the left join, we got all of the employees. In the right join, we got all of the branches. In other words, in the left join, we got all of the rows from the left table. In the right join, we got all of the rows from the right table. And so in certain circumstances, you're going to want to do either one of those. So those are the three basic types of joins that we can use in MySQL. There's actually a fourth type of join that I want to talk to you guys about. Unfortunately, we can't do it in MySQL, but it's called a full outer join. And basically, in a full outer join, it's basically a left join and a right join combined. So remember, in the left join, we grabbed all the employees. In the right join, we grabbed all the branches. In a full outer join, you would grab all of the employees and all of the branches, no matter if they met this condition or not. So, like I said, there's not like we can't just come over here and say like full join in MySQL. We're not gonna be able to do that, but I just wanted to let you guys know about it so that you kind of have context for it. So these joins are really simple and they're really easy and they can be really useful if you want to combine information. So something as simple as getting the names of all the branch managers and what branches they manage is really, really easy if we just use.
Bro, you made it sound like one.
एक सेकंड में देखता हूँ, मैं चेक कर रहा हूँ कुछ में। सेकंड में देखता हूँ, मैं चेक कर रहा हूँ कुछ में।
Once I learned Python, I'd have job offers lined up. But Python learn करना इतना easy नहीं है.
Bro, I told you to learn Python.
Use joins. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about nested queries in SQL. A nested query is basically a query where we're going to be using multiple select statements in order to get a specific piece of information. So a lot of times we're going to want to get very specific information, and we're going to need to use the results of one select statement to inform the results of another select statement. So this is a little bit more advanced, and this is kind of when we're getting into more advanced query writing. But I want to show you guys how this works, because a lot of information that you're going to want to get is going to involve using nested queries. So let's go ahead and put a prompt up on the screen. It says, find names of all employees who have sold over $30,000 to a single client. So we want to get the names of the employees if they've sold more than 50K to a client. So first thing I would do if we were trying to figure out how to write this query is let's just look at the information that we have. So down here we have this works with table, and the works with table has total sales, right? And each one of these rows defines how much a particular employee has sold to a particular client, right? So employee 105 sold $55,000 to client 400, etc. Right? So over here we have part of the information, right? In other words, here we have the total sales. But what we don't have is the employee's first name and their last name, right? We don't have the actual employee's name. What we do have, though, is the ID of the employee who did it, right? So we have the employee's ID, and we can use the employee's ID in order to get their first name and their last name. So in this case, we had part of the data here on the works with table, and we have part of the data up here on the employee table. And this is a situation where we can use a nested query. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write a query which is going to get me all of the employee IDs that have sold more than $30,000 to a single client. All right, so we're going to start with step one, which means we're getting all of the employee IDs from here if they've sold more than 30K. So let's go ahead and write that query. Shouldn't be too hard considering all the stuff that we know. So I'm going to select employee underscore ID from works with, and I'm going to select it where total sales is greater than 30,000. And we'll go ahead and end this. And actually up here, I'm just going to prefix this with the table name. So I'm going to say works with dot employee name. And then down here, we'll say works with dot
ये तो
sales,
सिंपल
just so
है
it's more clear. Especially when we get
इसमें
into
तो कोई
nested
join
queries,
नहीं
it's usually useful to prefix everything with the table name, just in case we have repeated column names. So over here, I'm going to run this, and this should give us all the IDs of the employees who have sold more than 30,000. So you see we get 102 and 105 shows up 3 times. So it looks like 105 has sold a lot of paper. And so now we have all of the IDs of the employees who have sold more than $30,000 worth of products. And so what we can do now is we can figure out from this information, we want to get those employees' first names and last names. So I'm going to go ahead and write another query up here. I'm going to say
मुझे स्टेट जॉइंस नहीं आता गाइस तो अभी सीखते हैं
select, and I'm going to say employee dot first name, and why don't we do employee dot last name, and we're going to select this from employee, and then over here we're going to say where, and this is where we're going to go ahead and use a nested query. So basically I want to select all the employees whose IDs we got from this query right here. So what I could do is I could say employee.empid in, and remember the in keyword is going to give us a result if the employee ID is in values that we specify inside of these parentheses. So what I could do is I can actually nest this query inside of there. So I can go ahead and take this and I can just paste it right in here in between these parentheses. And one thing you want to keep in mind is just how this is formatted. So you'll see I formatted this and it's indented from this query over here. And then I'm going to get rid of this semicolon.
या देखो याद आ गई मुझे इसमें क्या है ये जो लॉजिक इसने लगाया है ना देखो तो dot first name employee dot last name from और साथ में हम ये भी लगा सकते हैं वर्क्स विथ वो दोनों को टेबल देखता हूँ मैं एम्प्लॉय का टेबल ये है अपना, है ना? और अपना वर्कस्पेस का टेबल ये है, टोटल सेल्स वगैरह का। ठीक है, ठीक है, ठीक है, ठीक है। तो अपन क्या करेंगे, वर्कस्पेस डॉट टोटल सेल्स फ्रॉम एम्प्लॉय वेयर एम्प्लॉय आईडी इन हाउ मच इट इज इन टू से नेक्स्ट। हम्म तो एक ऐसे लिखना है इसमें, सेलेक्ट सेलेक्ट वर्क्स वर्क्स विथ डॉट empid employee डॉट empid। इतना स्पेसिफिक शायद होने की जरूरत, हाँ बस होने की जरूरत है, होने की जरूरत है। इक्वल्स इक्वल्स में aid फ्रॉम, हाँ फ्रॉम फ्रॉम works with where where works works with dot empid equals employee dot empid। ये हमारी नेस्टेड क्वेरी हो गई, चला के देखते हैं। हाँ ये हम नहीं प्रिंट कर पाएंगे, वर्क्स विद डॉट टोटल सेल्स नहीं प्रिंट कर पाएंगे, उतना ही कर पाएंगे जितना हमारे पास एम्प्लॉय में है। यहाँ ऐसे नहीं कर पाएंगे। तो माइकल स्कॉट स्टैनली हडसन, और अगर कंफर्मेशन के लिए एक बार हम एम्प्लॉय डॉट emp, उधर पानी पी लेते हैं यार। इसको चला के देखता हूँ मैं। 02 105 107 108, अगर मैं यहाँ जाके देखूंगा ना, 102 105 107 108, यही सामने। बढ़िया, चल यहाँ तक तो ठीक है। उफ, ओ भाई, यहाँ पर मैंने ये तो कर लिया मैंने।
And we'll put a semicolon over here. So basically what this is saying is I want to get the first name and the last name from the employee table where the employee ID is in the result of this query. So if the employee ID got returned from this query, which gave us the IDs of all of the employees who have sold over 30,000, then we're going to return their first name and last name. So let's go ahead and run this.
ओह शिट, ये नहीं, वर्सपेट डॉट टोटल सेल्स, जहाँ टोटल सेल्स इज ग्रेटर देन 30,000, ये थी हमारी कंडीशन। दो ही है, 102 105 कंफर्म।
You
हाँ,
can see over here, now we're getting the names of the two employees. So
माइकल स्कॉट, स्टैनली हडसन।
Michael Scott sold over 30,000 and Stanley Hudson also sold over 30,000. So that is actually a really cool way where we can find out that information. So that's how we can use a nested query, right? A lot of times you'll use this in keyword. I'll also show you some other examples where we use other things. But in that case, we're basically checking to see if the employee ID is in this result. All right, so now I have another prompt here. It says, find all clients who are handled by the branch that Michael Scott manages. So this is another interesting one. It says, assume you know
माइकल स्कॉट मैनेजर्स। ये तो आसान है। इसमें कैसा होगा, सिलेक्ट ब्रांच आईडी, ब्रांच नेम, मैनेजर आईडी फ्रॉम ब्रांच वेयर, और यहाँ पे ब्रांच डॉट ब्रांच आईडी, ब्रांच डॉट ब्रांच नेम, ब्रांच डॉट ब्रांच मैनेजर आईडी। ठीक है, वेयर ब्रांच डॉट मैनेजर आईडी इन, यहाँ से अपनी क्वेरी स्टार्ट हो सकती है। सेलेक्ट एम्प्लॉय डॉट एम आईडी फ्रॉम सॉरी गाइस, मैं खो गया था। एम्प्लॉय वेयर फर्स्ट नेम इक्वल्स माइकल। ठीक है, बढ़िया। स्क्रैंटन को मैनेज करता है माइकल। अगर हम देखेंगे ब्रांच में जाके स्क्रैंटन, लेकिन एम्प्लॉय में जाना चाहिए ना, तो माइकल 102 है। बढ़िया, तो बहुत आसान था। repeated
Michael's ID. So we're going to assume that we know what Michael Scott's ID is. This is another one where, again, we're going to need to grab data from one table in order to inform the data from another table. So the first thing that we want to be able to do is figure out the branch ID of the branch that Michael Scott manages, right? So over here we have our branches and key. Michael Scott should give us manager ID, and this is going to give us 2, right? Because 2 is the Scranton branch, which is the branch that Michael Scott manages. So now that we have this piece of information, name on here, we'll put this statement, and you'll see again, I'm just embedding this
इससे बढ़िया लिखी है मैंने पूरी
in here. So what's going to happen is when the relational database management system sees an embedded SQL statement like this, it's going to execute this first, and then it's going to execute the outer one. So it starts inner and then it slowly goes outer. So we'll be able to get the branch ID where Michael Scott is the manager, and then we can use that information to find all of the clients. So over here, I'm just going to click run, and I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this semicolon right here. And now we can go ahead and run this, and you'll see we get client.
and all the clients that are assume that I know okay and मैंने branches find कर दी इसका clients find करने थे इसको हम ट्रिपल नेस्टेड क्वेरी कर सकते हैं है ना यहाँ क्या लिखूंगा मैं supplier है ना execute select branch supplier dot branch id इसमें ट्रिपल नेस्टेड क्वेरी कर देता हूँ मैं supplier branch supplier dot branch name branch name from branch सॉरी गाइस थोड़ा मेरा ओसीडी हो जाता है कभी ठीक हो जाएगा किसी दिन मेरा लेकिन कोई नहीं फ्रॉम हर इंसान परफेक्ट नहीं होता हर इंसान की कमियां होती हैं आप मेरी जान लो लेकिन इसका मजाक मत उड़ाना तो फिर फ्रॉम ब्रांच सप्लायर वेयर वेयर ब्रांच आई ब्रांच सप्लायर डॉट ब्रांच आईडी फिर और क्या क्या था इसमें सप्लाई टाइप भी कर देते हैं ब्रांच सप्लायर और सप्लाई टाइप ये भी ठीक है फिर इसकी जगह हम पूरा एस्टेरिक्स ही मार देता हूँ मैं इसकी जगह मैंने एस्टेरिक्स मार दिया इक्वल्स इक्वल करते ही मेरे पास ऑप्शन क्या है कि मैं ये कॉपी कर दूं ये मेरे पास आ गया अरे how the fuck it is happening अच्छा वाह वाह आ गया ना ब्रांच आईडी टू अगर मैं जाऊंगा ब्रांच आईडी टू में समझ गए फिर गलती कर दी भाई, क्लाइंट देखना था। क्या कर रहा हूँ? कोई नहीं, ब्रांच क्लाइंट, फिर क्लाइंट डॉट, इतना से चेंज करने में हो जाएगा। क्लाइंट डॉट ब्रांच आईडी। तो 401 डनमोर हाई स्कूल, इन सबको मैनेज करता है कौन? माइकल। सही है। कुछ नहीं, अब ईआर डायग्राम नहीं लिखूंगा। एक वो बाकी है, कौन क्या बोलते हैं, एक देखना पड़ेगा, रुको देखता हूँ।
And where, and over here we're basically just going to say where client dot branch ID is equal to, and over here we're going to set it equal to the result of this. So down database management, and then it's going to be clients. These are all the clients. We get all.
बिल्कुल सेम आया ना मेरा और इसका, डनमोर लगाऊंगा, स्क्रैंटन और वो फेडेक्स, मैंने तो उसके बिना ज्यूम ही कर लिया। तो आप देखो, ये बस 3 नेस्टेड क्वेरी लगानी थी, तो वैसे ही हो जाना है। 3 के साथ मैंने, हाँ 3 लगाई है मैंने, दो दो लगाई है मैंने, तो 2 में ही हो गया। सिंपल। बढ़िया।
These clients. So we get like Dunmore High School, Lackawanna County, Scranton White Pages, and FedEx. So those are all the clients that are managed by the Scranton branch. Now there is one more thing I want to point out, which is you'll notice down here we're setting client.branch ID equal to, we're checking to see if it's equal to the result of this statement. But here's the problem is this statement isn't necessarily guaranteed to only return one value. It's made to its individual parts. Have a pretty complex database schema, right? We have all sorts of foreign keys that are linking between all sorts of places. And I want to post you breaks. And really the best way to get good at writing more complex queries like this is just to practice. So the more you practice writing nested queries and using all these things in combination, the better you're going to get at it. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about deleting entries in the database when they have foreign keys associated to them. So this is actually a pretty interesting topic. And over here in our company database, we have a pretty complex database schema, right? We have all sorts of foreign keys that are linking between all sorts of places. And I want to post you guys a scenario. Right, so imagine over here I have my branch table and I have my employee table. So imagine that I came over here in my employee table and I deleted one of the employees, right? So let's say that I deleted Michael Scott, right? So over here we have this employee, Michael Scott, and his branch ID is 2. So Michael Scott has a foreign key here defined, which is branch ID, right? So branch ID, Michael Scott's branch ID is 2, which means that Michael Scott belongs to the Scranton branch, which is right down there, right? But let's pose something like, imagine that we were to delete Michael Scott from the database, right? Well, what's going to happen to this manager ID down here? So if we delete Michael Scott, we delete the employee with ID 102. What's going to happen to the manager ID, right? The manager ID is supposed to be linking us to an actual row in the employee table. But if we delete Michael Scott, then all of a sudden 102, that doesn't mean anything, right? Because Michael Scott's gone. His employee ID is no longer inside of our employee table. And this is what I'm going to talk to you guys about today, which is different things that we can do in order to handle this situation. So specifically, I'm going to talk to you guys about 2 things. One is called onDelete set null, and the other is called onDelete cascade. So there's really 2 things that we can do when this situation occurs. And so the first thing would be onDelete set null. And onDelete set null is basically where if we delete one of these employees, that means that the manager ID that was associated to that employee is going to get set to null. OnDelete cascade is essentially where if we delete the employee whose ID is stored in the manager ID column, then we're just going to delete this entire row in the database. You guys about 2 things. One is called onDelete set null, and the other is called onDelete cascade. So there's really 2 things that we can do when this situation occurs. And so the first thing would be onDelete set null. And onDelete set null is basically where if we delete one of these employees, that means that the manager ID that was associated to that employee is going to get set to null. On delete cascade is essentially where if we delete the employee whose ID is stored in the manager ID column, then we're just going to delete this entire row in the database. So I'm going to go ahead and show you guys basically how this works. So over here,
देखो सिंपल सी मतलब है, बहुत सिंपल है, इससे सिंपल कुछ नहीं हो सकता। क्या है ना ये, हम गए एम्प्लॉय टेबल में। एम्प्लॉय टेबल में जो ब्रांच आईडी है, ये फॉरेन की है ब्रांच के लिए। यहाँ इस प्राइमरी की के मतलब ये फॉरेन की है इस प्राइमरी की ब्रांच के लिए, इस ब्रांच टेबल के लिए ये फॉरेन, वो फॉरेन की थी। समझ रहे हो? नहीं नहीं नहीं, थोड़ा गलत हो गया। एम्प्लॉय आईडी फॉर, हाँ नहीं नहीं, जो पहली टेबल होती है वो उसमें क्या होता है, हमारी प्राइमरी की होती है, दूसरी टेबल में हमारी फॉरेन की होती है। हाँ ये गलत बोल गया था। तो एम्प्लॉय आईडी में जो एम्प्लॉय में एम्प्लॉय आईडी है वो प्राइमरी की है हमारी। अब ये रेफरेंस हो रही है ब्रांच की मैनेजर आईडी से, जो यहाँ पे हमारी फॉरेन की है। अब इन केस अगर हमने 102 को डिलीट कर दिया, इन केस हमने 102 को डिलीट कर दिया, तो 102 को जो मैनेज करने वाला है हमारे प्राइमरी की वाले टेबल में, जो फॉरेन की, जो जिस प्राइमरी की को ये फॉरेन की मैनेजर आईडी रेफरेंस कर रही है, यानी एम्प्लॉय आईडी को, तो उसमें अगर 102 माइकल स्कॉट मतलब डिलीट हो गया, यहाँ से डिलीट हो गया माइकल स्कॉट, तो फिर क्या होगा इस ब्रांच टेबल में? इस ब्रांच टेबल में क्या होगा? इस ब्रांच टेबल में क्या ये नल हो जाएगी या डिलीट हो जाएगी, उसको वो डिपेंड करता है दो चीजों पे। दो चीजों में, एक ही चीज पर डिपेंड करता है कि डेटाबेस स्ट्रक्चर कैसा है। अगर डेटाबेस स्ट्रक्चर में ऑन डिलीट सेट नल है, ऑन डिलीट सेट नल कर रखा है, तो फिर अगर डेटाबेस स्ट्रक्चर में ऑन डिलीट, कहाँ गया ब्रांच, है ना, अगर डेटाबेस स्ट्रक्चर में ब्रांच मैनेजर आईडी, हाँ मैनेजर आईडी ऑन डिलीट सेट नल कर रखा है फॉरेन की बनाते वक्त, तो जैसे ही माइकल स्कॉट डिलीट हो जाएगा एम्प्लॉय टेबल से, जिसमें प्राइमरी की है, जिसको रेफरेंस की कर रही है मैनेजर आईडी एज अ फॉरेन की, तो इन ब्रांच टेबल वो मैनेजर आईडी नल हो जाएगी। लेकिन अगर ये यहाँ पे ये ऑन डिलीट कैस्केड होता, तो जैसे ही हमारी एम्प्लॉय टेबल में जो प्राइमरी की में माइकल स्कॉट डिलीट हुआ, है ना, 102 में, तो जिसको रेफरेंस कर रही थी मैनेजर आईडी, रिपीट इसलिए कर रहा हूँ ताकि आपके भी दिमाग में घुसे मैं क्या बोल रहा हूँ, मेरे दिमाग में घुसे। जिसको रेफरेंस कर रही थी ये मैनेजर आईडी एज अ फॉरेन की, प्राइमरी की फॉरेन जैसे एज अ मैनेजर आईडी, जिस एम्प्लॉय आईडी को जो प्राइमरी की थी एम्प्लॉय टेबल में, जिसको मैंने रेफरेंस कर रही थी हमारी ब्रांच टेबल की मैनेजर आईडी जो फॉरेन की है ना, अगर वहां पे माइकल स्कॉट डिलीट हो गया एम्प्लॉय टेबल में, तो यहाँ पे जो फॉरेन की में जो 102 है, अगर ऑन डिलीट कैस्केड हुआ तो वो डिलीट हो जाएगा, पूरी रो ही डिलीट हो जाएगी। इसका शायद ये प्रैक्टिकल भी दिखाएगा।
I actually have the code for creating this branch table, and this is the code that we used in one of the previous videos when I was showing you guys how to create this database. You'll notice over here on the branch table, it says foreign key manager ID references employee ID, and over here I said on delete set null. Basically, what I'm saying here is that if the employee ID in the employee table gets deleted, I want to set the manager ID equal to null. And so let me show you guys how this is going to work. So over here, I'm going to go ahead and delete Michael Scott from the database, and we'll see what happens. So I'm just going to go ahead and type out delete from employee where employee ID is equal to, and we're just going to put Michael Scott's
तो हम ट्राई भी करके देख लेते हैं, ऑन डिलीट नल में हमारी मैनेजर आईडी नल हो जानी चाहिए, तो ट्राई करके देखते हैं। अब देखते हैं क्या होगा। फिनिश विदाउट एरर्स। अब हम सेलेक्ट फ्रॉम ब्रांच करके देखेंगे, जहाँ पे 102 था, वहाँ जहाँ पे सेकंड ब्रांच पे वहाँ नल हो जाएगा। देखना क्या ये ये तो मेरा 23 रुपए वाला था, लेकिन 23 रुपए का नहीं आता, ज्यादातर 50 से 60 रुपए का आता है। 60 रुपए का आएगा, वो बहुत कम जगह मिलता है आपको 23 वाला। बड़ा वाला ले लेना, ईयर्स का, ठीक है। हाँ, फिर हो जाएगा। तो आप देख सकते हो जहाँ स्क्रैंटन जो माइकल स्कॉट हैंडल करता था वो नल हो चुका है ऑन डिलीट नल के कारण। तो यहाँ तो हमारा क्लियर है बिल्कुल।
employee ID, which is 102. And I'm going to go ahead and run this. And you'll see over here it says 1 rows affected. But I want to show you guys what happened inside of the branch. So I'm just going to select all from branch. And let's go ahead and run this. You'll see down here the manager ID is now set to null. And that's because over here, because we deleted Michael Scott, right? So we deleted the Michael Scott, the 102 entry in the employee table. And so now the manager ID, which was storing that as a foreign key, is just going to be set equal to null. And that's because that's what we defined up here. So in a situation like that, because we said on delete set null, now that entry is just going to be equal to null. And the same thing actually happened inside of the employee table. So if I was to select all from the employee table and I ran this, you'll see now that a lot of these supervisor IDs are also set equal to null.
बोल देना क्या, क्योंकि यार आपको यहाँ पे तो कुछ नहीं है भाई, कहीं रुकवा ही लेना, क्योंकि यहाँ पे कुछ नहीं है भाई, सिटी में कहीं रुकवाना तो बेटा कम बेच के एक निकाल पाओ होती है इससे। लेकिन यार कोई इसमें आना नहीं यार, बिल्ला तो बिल्ला ना हमें इससे बता देता हूँ। ठीक है भाई, अर्जेंट तो है यार, लाएंगे कैसे? केस केस, हाँ अर्जेंट है। अर्जेंट है, उसको बोला तेरा मिल तो नहीं रहा है हम लोग का, ठीक है मिल नहीं रहा तो प्लास्टिक में मोड़ के रखेंगे, क्या कर सकते हैं। जो अर्जेंट है उससे तो यहाँ भी नल हो गया। हाँ क्या नहीं, अच्छा रुकिएगा देखने अपना फार्म वो बात ले लो ना अगर। हम्म
And if you remember back to when we created the company database, when we created the employee table, the super ID also had on delete set null
102 डिलीट हुआ
associated to it. And so that's
है, यहाँ भी डिलीट हुआ है 102, अगर देखेंगे तो 102 कहीं नहीं दिख रहा।
why when we deleted Michael Scott, all of the employees, namely these 3 employees right here, who had Michael Scott as their supervisor,
लग रहा हूँ मैं ईआर डायग्राम छोड़ूंगा, रिकर्स तक जाऊंगा, उसके बाद मैं डिनर करने चले जाऊंगा। हाँ 15 मिनट और है, हो जाएगा।
you can see all these employees were at branch number 2. All of their super IDs ended up getting set equal to null because we had on delete.
यार कुछ मैं तो वही ट्रेनिंग का गोल एंकर रिवाइज कर लूँ, पता चला ये लोग अपना दिमाग वाला यूजर मेरा आएगा, यूजर क्या मैं क्या पता वो बेसिक एक्सपेक्ट कर रहा हो तुमसे, नहीं रिवाइज कर देना, नीचे अभी बस
set null there. So that is
अपने हिसाब से क्या है
is on delete set null, and that's basically how that works. I want to show you guys also how on delete cascade works. So we have this branch supplier table, and the branch supplier table also had a foreign key like this, but instead of saying on delete set null, we said on delete cascade. And when we use on delete cascade, what that means is that if the branch ID that's stored as the foreign key in the branch supplier table gets deleted, then we're just going to delete the entire row in the database. So
ओ, यानी कि सेकंड ब्रांच आईडी ब्रांच से रिमूव हो गई, ब्रांच में वो हो गई है, अगर ये ब्रांच आईडी रिमूव हो जाए तो फिर हमारा वहां भी डिलीट हो जाना चाहिए ब्रांच सप्लायर में, या ये सब डिलीट हो जाना चाहिए। तो चेक कर लेते हैं यार। हाँ, यहाँ ऑन डिलीट कैस्केड हो रखा है, वर्क्स कहाँ, ब्रांच सप्लायर में ऑन डिलीट कैस्केड, ये देखिए प्राइम फॉरेन की ब्रांच आईडी रेफरेंसेस ब्रांच आईडी और डिलीट कैस्केड। ठीक है यार, तो ब्रांच से डिलीट करता हूँ मैं, जैसे एम्प्लॉय से किया था वैसे ही ब्रांच से डिलीट करता हूँ मैं। डिलीट फ्रॉम ब्रांच वेयर वेयर ब्रांच आईडी इक्वल्स टू, क्योंकि वो माइकस कोड चला गया है। तो ये हो गया, सेलेक्ट स्टार फ्रॉम ब्रांच सप्लायर। देखो हट गया ना, दो बार दूसरा वाला ब्रांच ऑन डिलीट कैस्केड के कारण ये होता है भाई। ना मस्त मैजिक टाइप का हटा है ना, वो कहते ही जादू।
Down here in branch supplier, you'll see that I have all of this stuff, right? So I have like hammer mill supplies paper to branch ID 2, or Uniball supplies writing utensils to branch ID number 2. If I was to delete branch 2, in other words, if I was to delete the branch that had an ID of 2, then all of the rows that had branch ID 2 here would just get deleted. So I'm going to show you guys how that works. So over here, we're going to go ahead and do that. So we're just going to delete from branch where branch ID is equal to 2. And so when I go ahead and delete this, what's going to happen is all of those branch supplier rows are going to get deleted that had 2 as their foreign key. So now I'll just select all from branch supplier. And when I run this query, you'll notice that there's no longer any branch IDs 2 in here. In other words, we got rid of all of the suppliers that supplied branch 2 when we deleted branch 2. And that's what onDelete Cascade is going to do for us. Instead of just setting those equal to null, it's going to go ahead and just delete them entirely. So now that we kind of understand the difference between those two, I want to talk to you guys about the different situations where we might use them. And actually, the branch supplier table and the branch table are actually really good examples. So in the branch table, we used onDelete set null, and it was okay for us to use onDelete set null because the manager ID on the branch table is just a foreign key. It's not actually a primary key. And so the manager ID isn't like absolutely essential for the branch table. However, if we look down here in the branch supplier table, you'll notice that the branch ID, in other words, the foreign key here, is also
कंपोजिट
the
की है,
primary
पार्ट है ना, ब्रांच आईडी और सप्लायर नेम दोनों मिलके एक प्राइमरी की थी। अगर यहाँ कुछ डिलीट हो रहा है ना तो वो नुकसान दे रहा है, इट्स लाइक इंफॉर्मेशन जा रही है, प्राइमरी की नहीं मतलब बनने में, मतलब नहीं बन पाएगा। ये कहाँ से बनेगा यार, देखो थ्री, इट्स लाइक बन सकता है लेकिन ऐसे इंफॉर्मेशन लॉस हो रहा है थोड़ा।
key, which means the branch ID on the branch supplier table is absolutely crucial for this row in the database, right? And so if the branch ID here, if this branch disappears, we can't set this to null because a primary key can't have a null value, right? And so this can't be null. We have to just delete the entire thing. And so that's why we use onDelete Cascade as opposed to onDelete set null. And honestly, it's really up to you which one you want to use. But just know that if you have a situation like branch supplier where a foreign key is also a primary key, or also this can't be null, we have to just delete the entire thing. And so that's why we use onDelete.
ओ हाँ, मतलब ये बंदे ने बोला, मैंने उल्टा बोल दिया जल्दबाजी में, जल्दबाजी नहीं करनी चाहिए। ये बंदे ने बोला कि अगर आप ऑन डिलीट इसको नल छोड़ दोगे, उसको नल छोड़ दोगे, दोनों मिलके प्राइमरी की कैसे बनेंगी? यही सोचो ना, ये दोनों मिलके प्राइमरी की नहीं बन, यहाँ नल और हैमर मिल प्राइमरी की नहीं बन सकते कि नल के साथ आप नहीं इक्वेट कर सकते। ये तभी प्राइमरी की बनेगी दोनों मिलके ब्रांच आईडी सप्लायर ने जब कुछ वैल्यू होगी। तो इसलिए इससे अच्छा डिलीट ही मार दो। तो आप जब डिलीट मार देते हैं और ऐसे भी छोड़ देते हैं तो ये प्राइमरी की फिर भी बन रही है। वैसे 3 और पैट्रियट पेपर स्टिल यूनिक, 3 और यूनिवर्सिटी यूनिक, 3 और हैमर मिल स्टिल यूनिक है।
appears, we can't set this to null because a primary key can't have a null value, right? And so this can't be null. We have to just delete the entire thing. And so that's why we use on delete cascade as opposed to on delete set null. And honestly, it's really up to you which one you want to use. But just know that if you have a situation like branch supplier where a foreign key is also a primary key or also a component of a primary key, then it always has to be on delete cascade. Otherwise, you're going to run into trouble. So that's the basics of those different on delete. So on delete set null and on delete cascade. And both of those are extremely useful when we're defining foreign key relationships between tables. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you guys about using triggers in SQL and MySQL. Now, a trigger is basically a block of SQL code which we can write, which will define a certain action that should happen when a certain operation gets performed on the database. So I could write a trigger which would basically tell MySQL to do something when like a entry was added into a particular table in the database or when something was deleted from a database table. Basically, I could say like, hey, anytime
तो भाई ये लोग माई सीक्वल का यार ये लोग मतलब माई सीक्वल का
a row gets deleted from this table, I want you to like insert something into something else. So triggers can be extremely powerful and extremely useful. So I'm going to show you guys basically how they work, and we'll just talk about like setting them up and everything. So the first thing we have to do, at least to follow along with this tutorial, is we're going to create a table. And you don't have to create this table. I'm just doing this so we can illustrate what's happening, but this is not necessary for triggers. But I'm creating a table called trigger test, and it's just going to have one column, which is just going to be a message. And I'm just going to go ahead and create this. So we're creating this table trigger test. And now what we can do is we can start writing out some triggers. Now, when we're using MySQL, and up to this point in this course, we've been using this program PopSQL, which is actually an awesome program for writing out different SQL commands, and it's been really great because it's a bit easy for us to visualize stuff. But when we're going to write triggers, we're going to have to define the triggers over here in the command line. And that's just because there's one special thing that we have to do, which is change the SQL delimiter that we're going to use, and I'll talk to you guys about that in a second. But in order to do that, we're going to have to do it inside of the terminal. So if you're on Windows, you can just go down and open up the MySQL command line client. So it's this guy right here. That's what I have open. It might ask you to log in. If you're on the OS X and you're using terminal, you can just type in, if you just type in MySQL-u root -p and then hit enter, it should prompt you for your password, and then you should be logged in. And so that's how you can get to this screen over here. And then once we're in here, we're going to want to use the database. So I'm just going to say use Draft, and Draft is the name of the database that I created like in the first tutorial. So whatever the database you created was, you can just use that. And then over here, so once we have all that set up, now we're ready to go and start creating these triggers. So I need to actually execute the trigger code over here inside of the command line, but we can actually just write it out over here inside PopSQL, so it's a little bit easier to see. I'm actually just going to show you guys some different triggers, and then I'll kind of talk to you about it. So I'm going to go ahead and paste one over here, and this is actually a very simple trigger. So the trigger is actually right here, what I have highlighted, and then you'll see over here I'm saying like a delimiter. So I'm going to talk to you guys about the trigger first, and then I'll talk to you guys about what that delimiter is doing. So we can basically create a trigger by saying create, and then I can say trigger. We're going to give this a name. I'm just going to call it my trigger, and I can say before insert on employee for each row begin insert into trigger test. So what does all this mean? Basically, I'm defining my trigger, I'm giving it a name, and I'm saying that before something gets inserted on the employee table, so before anything, any new item gets inserted on the employee table, for each of the new items,
मैं चेक करता हूँ ट्रिगर होता है SQLite में नहीं। अच्छा होते हैं यार, ये मन नहीं कर रहा।
items that are getting inserted, I want to insert into the trigger test table the values added new employee. So basically what happens is when I define this trigger, that means that before anything gets inserted on the employee table now, I'm going to go ahead and perform.
सिंपल है भाई ये ट्रिगर, बाद में देख लेंगे। ये आसान है कि किसी भी इवेंट से वही सेम ऑपरेशंस हो रहे हैं, बस ये इवेंट जब होगा तो ये एग्जीक्यूट करना है, वो समझ रहे हो? मतलब ये एक सिंटैक्स है इसका जो याद रखना है अपने को, लेकिन अब इसके लिए दोबारा सब कुछ करना लाइक अभी बाद में करेंगे, अभी के लिए
whatever is down here. And in our case, I'm just inserting into
तो गाइस
trigger test the values added.
अपना स्ट्रीम अभी मैं बंद कर रहा हूँ
a new employee. So that's basically
थोड़ी देर में। हाँ जी।
all it is. We're basically configuring MySQL to insert a value into the trigger test table whenever a value gets inserted into the employee.
तो अभी बंद करते हैं कि ये सिंपल चीज़ है, बस एक जब ऑपरेशन कर रहे हैं तो दूसरा ऑपरेशन फिर अपने आप एग्जीक्यूट करना स्टार्ट हो जाए लाइक अ प्रोग्राम। तो बाद में देखेंगे इसको। गाइस बाय, हैव अ नाइस डे।